Everything. Everything. Okay, fine, thank you.
Is that the live stream started? Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Development Standards, the last meeting of Development Standards in this term. And I would just like to ask for apologies of absence.
An apology from Councillor Sturrock, convener.
Right, thank you. Agenda item 2, declaration of interest. No declarations of interest. Move on to agenda item 3, building warrants. The committee is asked to note that during the period the 25th of February to the 25th of March 2022, a total of 51 building warrants, 11 amendment to warrants have been approved with an estimated cost of £3,473,605. Is that noted? Agenda item 4, delegated decisions. The committee is asked to know that during the period the 25th of February to the 25th of March 2022, a total of 51 building warrants, a total of 41 planning applications have been approved under the scheme of delegation to officers. Is that noted?
Noted.
I got a wrong line there someplace, but however. Agenda item 5, minutes of previous meeting. Is that those approved?
Agreed.
Agreed. Move on to agenda item 6. This is a planning application at Strathmartin Hospital. I'm pleased to see this to come before us today because I think between Councillor King and myself, I think this has been going on for 20 years. And I think it'd be squeaking to see it come before us before we retire. So I should see by the abstract, I won't read the abstract, I'll just ask Ed to deliver his slides and his presentation.
Thank you, convener, and good morning, members. Can I just check that's visible to you all?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just try and make that full screen. Okay. As you've suggested, item 6 relates to an application for the approval of matters specified in conditions 2 and 3 of the planning permission in principle, which was granted for the redevelopment of the former Strathmartin Hospital site. So the application before members today relates to the erection of 212 new build residential homes. So the application site position of the red polygon in the centre of the screen. The site sits just to the east of Bridgefoot and around about 300 metres to the North City Council administrative boundary. I'll just touch upon the planning history of the site, but I'm sure members are pretty familiar with this one. But planning permission for the redevelopment of the former hospital site was granted in April 2018 by Scottish ministers. That permission in principle allowed for 224 homes on the site, and that followed a resolution to grant planning permission by Angus Council in 2014. There was a subsequent permission granted to develop the site without complying with the conditions of the previous permission in principle. So that effectively granted a new planning permission in principle, and that was granted by Angus Council in 2020. The other background points of relevance are there a planning obligation which regulates the site. That plans financial contributions towards improvements to the capacity of the primary school, which sits around about 600 metres to the west of the site. The planning obligation also secures 25% affordable housing provision on the site, and in this case 50% of that 25%, so that's 28 units, will be delivered on site in the area adjacent to Ashton Terrace, and 50% of the affordable housing will be delivered by commuted payments. So that's already been agreed through the planning permission in principle that's been put in place, and the planning obligation that goes with that permission in full. So the other relevant background factor is permission has been granted, planning permission and listed building consent has been granted for the conversion of listed buildings within the site already. That allows for 12 dwellings to come forward. And it's worthy of note at this stage that those listed buildings cannot be fully restored, or that permission cannot be fully implemented until development on the wider site has commenced. So of the 224 houses which have been granted permission, 12 have already been granted a detailed permission through the listed building conversion, and what we're looking at today is the remaining 212 new build properties within the site. So permission has been granted and in principle cannot be revisited. We're looking at the detail of the application related to a site master plan, looking at detailed matters relating to housing design and layout within the site linked to a site master plan. And just to reaffirm that granting application today would allow development of the site to commence. So in terms of the master plan, there's various elements to it, and that's shown on the screen before you, but I'll just talk about the three different main elements of housing on the site. So in the area identified surrounded by the blue polygon, they're the listed buildings on the site. As I say, they've already been granted consent for conversion and restoration, but the master plan shows that the setting of those buildings will be significantly enhanced by the demolition of buildings which sit just to the south of the principal elevation of those buildings in this area. Those buildings will be demolished and a new suds area and open spaces will be formed in that location, which will be a significant enhancement to the amenity of the site and the cultural heritage value of the site, allowing views to and from the listed buildings from the south. Moving on to the second aspect, that's the affordable housing. The affordable housing area is located in this position to the southeast of the site. That would be accessed from Ashton Terrace and would form in this approximate position. Finally, 184 mainstream houses are included as part of the application. Those houses have been approved to cross-fund the restoration works throughout the site, but the phasing information submitted suggests that in over 4 years, of the latter 6 years, starting in the east area and moving clockwise round to the southwest, to the northwest, and to the northeast. But in terms of the phasing information which has been submitted, it importantly notes that all the buildings which are proposed to be removed within the site would be cleared on a continuous basis within the first 12 months. So that would help solve some of the issues with arson and vandalism which has taken place as recently as I understand it as last week. Also within the first 2 years would be the formation of the homes through the conversion of listed buildings and the formation of affordable housing. So listed buildings converted, affordable housing delivered in the first 2 years, and in the following 4 years, the mainstream housing would come forward. The other aspects of the master plan are the planning permission and principal conditions require consideration of the site accesses, and two main accesses would be utilised into the site. They are existing accesses and they would be improved to council standards. So starting with the central access at the south of the site, that would be, as I say, enhanced, improved to council standards, and importantly, the mature lime tree avenue which runs along the central southern part of the site, that would be retained as part of the development. The other main access into the site would be East Drive. Again, that would be improved to council standards. That would also allow access onto Ashton Terrace, the affordable housing area. And as I say, East Drive will be improved in the area into the site on the east side of the site. Drainage for the development. Foul drainage will be delivered by means of connections to the public sewer. Scottish Water has been consulted on the application and has offered no objection. Surface water will be dealt with by sustainable drainage, ultimately discharging into a new detention basin located to the south of the site in this location. There will be significant areas of open space within the site in excess of the policy requirements of the local development plan. They would mainly be delivered in the central parts of the site, in the area to the south of the listed buildings and the areas of sloped ground between the housing platforms which will be formed within the site. So there will be an equipped play area in this approximate position, and amendments have been made during the life of the application to address concerns raised by third parties. And one of those amendments is the relocation and restoration of the walled garden, the rose garden, which is located in this approximate position. So the site is challenging and there is a level change from the highest point of the site, which is approximately 50 metres higher than the lowest point of the site. And that presents a number of engineering challenges to deliver roads of a suitable gradient. But the general pattern of development is followed from existing. So buildings within the site at the moment are built into platforms within the slope, and the application proposes to extend upon those existing development platforms with sloped ground in between. Now the sloped ground presents a good opportunity for significant new planting, which is required as a consequence of tree loss, which would be touched upon in subsequent slides. In terms of the general layout of the master plan, though, it addresses the issues identified in the planning permission in principle, and it's considered to be acceptable. Sorry, just to touch upon public access. One of the conditions of the planning permission in principle requires a new footpath connection to the west, connecting up to Strathmartin Primary School. So the details submitted as part of that have been considered by the road service. It accords with the conditions approved by members as part of the planning permission in principle. New bus infrastructure will be provided to the south of the site with a relocated bus stop, bus lay-by and bus shelter with real-time information located in this approximate position, and there will be a footpath connection tying into that. So this is just an oblique view of the site, looking from sort of, I suppose, to the west, looking across the site to the east. So what it shows quite helpfully is the fairly extensive number of buildings that are required to be demolished. So they're illustrated by blue circles. And I'll just draw members' attention to the one here to the south of the listed buildings. So the ones that are being kept are shown by the stored, but as part of the enhancement of the setting of those buildings would be removed, including this one in this location, which, as I say, would really open up the side of listed buildings. Members will also see from this slide there is fairly extensive tree cutting in the site, and some fairly significant tree felling is required. I'll come to that in the next slide, but it's just worth pointing out at this stage this will be kept along the centre of the site, as would the Scotch pine plantation to the north of Ashton Terrace on this side of the site. And when viewed from the south, the site has an existing landscape framework which is enhanced on the higher ground by the existing woodland plantation, and that would also be largely retained. It would be enhanced with new woodland planting and woodland management, which would ensure development would fit in the term, just allowing it to settle into the sloped site. But as you can see, there are significant areas of building which require to be demolished. Those demolitions would take place in the first 12 months. Just to give you an impression of the tree felling, which is an unfortunate, unavoidable consequence of the sloping nature of the site and the need to find an engineering solution for it. So the slide on the left shows a position of trees which would require to be removed. They are mainly concentrated in the central areas of the site and in the southwest corner. So the tree survey information submitted suggests 120 trees required to be felled on health and safety grounds, with a further 118 trees felled as a result of development. As I say, that is an unavoidable consequence of the engineering solution that's required to make development work. But the applicant proposes to mitigate significant impacts associated with loss of trees with significant new planting. As I say, also the existing landscape framework around the periphery of the site would be maintained, the mature lime avenue in the centre of the site and the Scots pine plantation to the north of Ashton Terrace. So we've discussed the landscaping proposal with our colleagues in landscape services, and they consider the landscaping proposal are acceptable, subject to conditions requiring 10% of new trees to be at least light standard tree planting, so that the tree coverage of the new trees planted provide a fairly instantaneous effect to some degree on at least 10% of the new planting proposed. Now, this is an extract of the affordable housing area adjacent to Ashton Terrace, and I've provided this detail because this part of the site has been probably the main source of representation from parties who live on Ashton Terrace. So the access to this area would utilise the existing adopted public road, and the road service considers that access route to be accepted of the road. It is an adopted road. It's wide enough to accommodate two-way traffic and is considered suitable, having regard to advice from our colleagues in the road service. But the form of pattern of development in this area, which is already found on Ashton Terrace, the applicant has made changes to this area to try and address some of the concerns of residents. They've introduced additional parking in this area, so there's now 12 spaces over and above those required by council standards for affordable housing to ensure there's enough parking for the households and for any guests that visit the site. A turning area is incorporated so that the residents on Ashton Terrace, things like bin lorries, can turn within the site safely. And in terms of impacts from the housing proposed on existing houses, they are generally in accordance with council standards in terms of there wouldn't be any overlooking, particularly of garden areas, and the house space standards are reasonable. The other point that's relevant pointing out is the amendments have been made to the scheme for the northerlymost block in this area to provide surveillance of the SUDS area for safety and security purposes. But just to give an impression of the type of house proposed in the affordable housing area, 2-storey units with ridge roofs parallel to the street, which mirrors the form of development found elsewhere in the area and certainly that found on Ashton Terrace. 184 mainstream houses, this just gives an impression of the type of house which is proposed within the development. The bottom right image is a computer generated image of a street within the development. So what it shows is the houses would address the streets and provide natural surveillance of the streets and footpaths. The front gardens would be enclosed by hedging, which should create a fairly pleasant residential environment. Amendments have also been made to the scheme. This is slightly misleading, the slide, in that it shows houses that are sort of a light colour, a sort of an off-white colour, but the applicants made amendments to the scheme to ensure that the material finishes of the houses are more recessive, so that they appear more compatible with the material finishes of listed buildings, sit down with the finish in the slope. So I've just got a few slides that show the site sections, but this one shows just an impression of how the housing would be delivered. So housing fronting onto the street with sloping ground between the housing platforms, which would be planted up. So this just gives an impression of how that might appear on the west side of the site in the centre, and the lower side, the lower image on the right hand side, on the east side of the site. So sloped ground which would be planted up between on the sloped ground between the housing platforms. So as I say, this is a development which requires relatively significant level changes to provide the platforms for housing, but that is a partnered development which exists within the site. The houses within the site are currently built on development platforms, and that pattern of development would be extended, but that requires some fairly significant level changes. So the housing platforms on level ground, sloping ground between, and those areas would be planted up, which would help in time the houses sit within the landscape on that sloped site. And this is just a section, just again to illustrate those housing platforms, landscaping areas either side of the platforms, just to help the development fit within the site. From within the Dundee boundary, looking across Potempton Farm in the foreground towards the site, this is Ashton, so there will be an extension of that road into the area just in this approximate position for the affordable housing areas. This is the mature Scots pine plantation, which will be retained to the north of Ashton Terrace. You'll see the listed building in this general location. Some of the trees in the foreground in front of that will be removed, which opens up the setting of that building. I'd also point out the peripheral larch plantation, which surrounds the northern parts of the site. That would largely be maintained, just allowing development to fit within the site when viewed from the south. And this is a photograph side of Ashton Terrace. So this is the location of the access into the affordable housing area. So it just shows that the road is of a reasonable width. It's served by a footway. There's also a footway on the other side of the houses on the south side of Ashton Terrace. Houses in Ashton Terrace generally have in-curtilage parking, but there would be room for on-street parking to be retained as necessary, and also to allow space for access for vehicles to enter the site. So the application has attracted 25 representations, primarily raising objections to the application, but amendments have been made to the proposal to try and address those concerns, including amendments to the affordable housing area to increase the parking available. While the affordable housing area would be developed on an area of land which is currently used informally by residents of Ashton Terrace, what the development does do it incorporates good footpath connections into the open space which will be delivered within the site, including the equipped play area, to allow that area to also. The rose garden has been repositioned within the site, having regard to representations submitted, and the applicant has contacted third parties in an attempt to address the representations made, and has offered additional consultation activity. But at this stage, there are no consultee objections to the proposal, and officers consider adverse impacts associated with the development can be mitigated. The proposal is considered to provide adequate information to satisfy the requirements of the planning permission in principle. It would facilitate restoration of the listed buildings and the comprehensive redevelopment of the site in line with the requirements of Opportunity Site ST1 of the local development plan. The application is considered to comply with the relevant policies of the development plan. Officers consider there to be no material considerations which would justify refusal of planning permission, and on that basis the application is recommended for approval.
Right, thank you, Ed, for that very explicit presentation. Members, any questions to our officer? Councillor Durno.
Thanks, Ed, for your presentation. My usual question, new developments that's starting up. We've obviously got the footpath that's going to the school. Will the developer put in enough litter bins and dog bins? Because obviously there's an increase in dogs and the children walking to school on paths. So can they give assurances that they can provide this? And also on the green spaces, is it the council or is it going to be a developer? Just things that sort of come up on a day-to-day basis, Ed. So I just thought I'd ask. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the applicants with us today, so they may be able to say something about the provision of bins for dog fouling. They aren't explicitly part of the proposal. I think we would rather encourage residents to collect their own dog mess and take it home with them, but I'm sure the applicant will be prepared to comment on that aspect when it comes around to their turn to speak. Sorry, the second part of your question was about the maintenance of open space. Sorry, I should have covered that in my presentation, so I apologise. But there is a fairly detailed site factoring development plan that shows that all footpaths, open spaces within the site will be subject to a site factoring arrangement. So that will be something that will be paid for by residents of the development rather than the council.
That's what I thought, Ed. I just wanted to get that assurance because I don't think some people realise when they buy a house that they actually have to pay for these maintenance to be done. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, thanks, Kavina. Ed, just you referred to the number of trees that are to be moved clearly for as part of the demolition process and build. I wasn't entirely sure what we were getting in as in committed to replanting. It was a bit, I wasn't sure. I mean, it's quite a substantial number that are coming down, mature trees. So what's specifically being promised as replanting over the programme of the 6 years?
Yeah. So again, apologies, I probably should have more thoroughly covered that in my presentation. No, the applicant's tree planting proposals, I think, provides probably about 5 times the number of trees that are coming out. So I think the design statement suggests something 900 to 1,000 new trees planted. And as I've suggested, through discussions with the applicant and our colleagues in landscape services, we will seek to ensure that at least 10% of those new trees planted would be at least light standard trees. So they would have some immediate effect in terms of the development for when people move into new houses. So I should also point out that I think there's around 1,000 trees. The tree survey suggests there's around 1,000 trees that would be retained in terms of the woodland plantation that surrounds the site.
Okay, but significant number going in rather than coming out, which is important.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions to Ed?
Yes.
Councillor Moore, convener.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you, convener. Yes, Mr. Taylor, thank you for the presentation. You referred to the amount of trees having to come out, some merely for convenience, but you didn't. I thought I read somewhere about removal of trees from the perimeter woodland, which you haven't touched on. Is there any idea how many of those we're going to lose?
So it's not quantified in terms of tree numbers because obviously these are dense trees planted in a woodland plantation. It's not sort of trees that you can do a detailed tree survey of, but it is probably a relatively small area of that trees. I find it hard to quantify, but I think the important point is that the there would be a new understory plantation planted within that woodland and woodland management arrangements. So there would be a small level of tree removal within those woodland areas. The vast majority will be retained. There will be tree management for that remaining area and new understory planting. So in terms of the long-term impact of that woodland, when the trees reach the age of maturity and start to die, there would be succession planting that has matured to ensure that the landscape impact of that in the longer term is secured.
Yeah, because I mean, has anybody worked out how many decades it will be before the new planting can pick up the carbon dioxide input that the current trees are taking?
I don't believe that exercise has been carried out, Councillor.
It might be an idea to try it. And the other question is, the affordable housing is coming off Ashton Terrace. Is there any reason why we've accepted it all being tucked in one corner out of the way, so it's not where the mainstream housing is? I mean, it looks like they've just, oh well, just stick them out of there, out of the way. Do we?
Yeah, I mean that's something that comes up fairly regularly, but it's actually in discussions with housing associations, they actually prefer them to be clustered in a certain area for things like ongoing maintenance. So it's easier for the housing association for development to be delivered in that way. But yeah, I take your point, but I don't think 28 houses is a particularly significant cluster in one specific location. So if there were lots more, a much larger development, for example, then we might have looked for them to be put in different parts of the development. But I don't think 28 is a particularly significant number in a particular cluster.
Yeah. It's significant if you're moving into there and going, your kids want to go to the play area.
Councillor
Anyway.
Cheek, did you have your hand up?
Yes, Commissioner, so I should have mentioned it was my second part of my question. It was on the commuted sums that are I know there's affordable housing and then there's commuted sums involved. Have you got a figure for that, and also what would intend the commuted sums being used specifically for?
So there's commuted sums towards the improvements of the school and commuted sums towards the provision of off-site affordable housing. So those figures are set out in council policy and council guidance based on calculations. So I believe the affordable housing commuted sum is somewhere in the region of, sorry, I don't have the precise figure, somewhere in the region to £25,000 to £30,000 per house. So it's the equivalent of providing a serviced house plot. So 28 times that amount effectively for affordable housing. And for the school, forgive me, it's a figure that's specified in the supplementary guidance. It might be around 5,000 per unit. Sorry, it's specified in published council.
That's how I
policy.
understand it to be.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I'm just trying to see if it's just, let's say, that £5,000, the total value that would be then available and used and taking it's going to be used to improve Strathmartin Primary School. And so how much money be pumped into that?
So it would be a payment for every house apart from those delivered in listed buildings and those delivered for the affordable housing. So it would be 184 times the amount.
Okay, so we're heading towards £1 million in that case.
Yes,
then.
it's a significant amount.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, officer? Councillor Moore, you've had 2 questions already, but I'll allow you another one.
I didn't realise there was a restriction on a quasi-judicial body, but Mr. Taylor, you say that we're getting a commuted sum for the 28 offside properties. Will that commuted sum be sufficient for us to provide 28 properties off-site?
So the commuted sum, as I understand it, is the equivalent of providing a serviced plot within the development. So that is the established council policy, a long-standing council policy as set out in the approved supplementary guidance.
So what we're saying is that it won't provide 56 properties in total.
It will comply with council policy as approved by members.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions to Ed? No other questions. We'll move on to our list of speakers. Our first speaker this morning is Karen McCauley. Karen McCauley,
Hello there, good morning.
good morning. You've got
thank
5
you.
minutes.
Thank you very much for having me on today. Before I begin, I'd just like to take a moment for us all to really acknowledge and pay tribute to the former residents, their families, the staff, and more importantly, or as importantly, the Ogilvies, who without them, we actually wouldn't be sitting here today holding the meeting and we wouldn't be progressing forward. As part of something that I raised in the objection is actually to do with consultation with members of the learning disability community in the Craigowell unit that sits next door to the hospital. One of the main reasons is that I've worked with many of these individuals and I've also recorded their oral histories. So I understand what the hospital means to them as their former home. I also understand that many of these individuals have been residing within the area for 50 to 60 years, many of whom never wanted to leave and haven't been relocated due to the trauma of leaving the site. They will eventually move to Murray Royal, but I would ask that the council and the developers moving forward do hold some form of consultation with the unit next door and people with learning disabilities to ensure that the work that's going to be carried out for the demolition doesn't impact them too much. If we can get some form of reconciliation, advocacy or support for them so that they can watch their former homes be demolished right in front of their eyes, I would be exceptionally grateful if somebody could look into that, because for them, this is their home. It doesn't make a difference if those buildings have been burnt down. It doesn't make a difference if they are historically significant. They were people's homes, and we need to remember that as we move through that process. As well with Ashton Terrace, I am delighted to see some of the changes in, particularly the change of colour and for the car parking spaces and the turning point. Again, members of Ashton Terrace, some of whom are actually former members of staff, are watching this happen in front of their eyes. Again, they wish to see development go ahead, and I'm pleased to see Robert and Miller's actually contact us all about holding a consultation in the future. A couple of points that I'd raised that have come up today is I note that within the correspondence I've received, there's no mention of badgers, and you are telling us that you're looking at scrubland between some of the wards that are there currently, Ward 6, Ward 8, Ward 9. There's a triangular section that has D-set badger sets that has been acknowledged by Scottish Natural Heritage. There is no provision for that within this work. There is no survey that's been held, and there's no mention of badgers within the response. Just because they don't come on a list doesn't mean to say they don't exist. And they are protected. And this would be the area, Ed, that you're talking about replanting trees in. So looking at the scrubland that you're going to plant trees, number of badger sets, and you do need to find out whether they are live or whether they are old. If they're live sets, then you need to undertake work to make sure that the badger sets are not disturbed through this process as well. A note on the trees there, a significant amount of woodland has been taken down at the rear of the site to make way for an entire street of houses. So I do acknowledge that you will be planting new trees. However, let's be honest about the situation. You can't build an entire row of houses with a garden and still claim to be maintaining woodland. We are butchering and destroying a vast amount of woodland within this process. I do understand that works need to be undertaken. I don't feel that it's sympathetic or empathetic to the natural beauty of the site, but also the wildlife as well.
Karen, you've 1 minute. Karen, you've 1 minute.
No problem at all. I'm pleased to see that we are back into education, but what I would say is that moving forward, we do consider these things. We look at them, we survey it, reevaluate, and if these things aren't an issue, let's move forward. We don't want to stop development. We would like to see it move forward, but done in a way that protects everybody, where there's consultation and we could move forward as a community and together with the developers, and not in argument or confrontation. I think I've said everything else I have to say in my rather long representation, but I do thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning.
No, not at all. It wasn't a long presentation. No, you're well within your time. Any questions to Karen? No questions?
No questions, convener.
Well, we'll move on. Councillor Breeze?
Yes, thanks, convener. Ms Macaulay raised the issue of badgers. Would it be appropriate for Mr Taylor to comment on that at this stage?
Well, either that or I was going to be asking the agent to probably answer that question. But
I'm happy to comment, convener, if that would help. I'm happy to comment. Sure. So this is perhaps a failing on my presentation, so I apologise. In response to the representative, actually asked the applicant to ask their ecologist to review the photograph and the representation in terms of the concern about a potential badger set. Now, the ecologist visited the site and checked that, and it was their opinion that that wasn't actually a badger set. It was likely to be used by rabbits rather than badgers. So we did actually ask a qualified ecologist to go and check that matter. They have checked it, and their advice is that that isn't actually a badger set. It's more likely to be used by rabbits. So we're satisfied in terms of the ecology information that the development would not result on any impact or any unacceptable impact on badgers, and there's no evidence of badgers found within the site.
Okay, thank you. That's a good question, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I would just like to say thanks to Ms Macaulay for a very eloquent presentation, and also I think it is important, you know, we do have to remember that these were people's homes that we're demolishing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions to Karen? No other questions? No other questions?
No questions, convener.
Right, thank you. Right, we'll move on to our next speaker, who is the agent, Robert Evans, who's also got some Andrew MacArthur from Miller Homes, and well, he's got a team around him to answer any questions. So, Robert Evans, the applicant, ask you for your presentation.
Morning. Could you hear me okay?
Yes, hear you quite well.
Excellent. Good. Thank you very much. Yes, I've got a team around me, which are the developers, the house builders, and some other members of the design team, Peter Chamberlain and Alan Bell from Chamberlain Bell, Andrew MacArthur from Miller Developments, Catherine Tatton, Kenny Ross from EMA Architects, and myself. Apologies if there are others sitting there as well, but we are here to answer questions, give you any clarifications that you need on technical or environmental matters. Good morning, convener, members of the committee, officers. I will be brief. I too am delighted to sit before you this morning to consider this final stage of the planning process for the redevelopment of the former hospital site. I, like many of you, have aged quite literally by 10 years in dealing with this application. It's been a long, windy and bumpy road since the original master plan was supported with the resolution to grant by the Full Angus Council back in December of 2014. Since then, the application has been subject to judicial review, call-in by the Scottish Government, ministerial approval, granting permission subject to a Section 75 agreement in respect of education contributions and affordable housing. Those education contributions total to £1.9 million or thereby, just under £5,000 per each of the 184 units for the secondary provision, and £5,500 for each of the 184 for the primary school provision. The affordable housing, 25% affordable housing across the site, is 56 units, 28 being provided on site by Hillcrest. 28 are being provided by affordable contribution, developer contribution for off-site provision at £28,000 per plot, which is the figure that Ed quoted. More recently, the Section 42 application was granted, and this is the continuation of that process in providing the detailed design and specification for the site. And I think we are now nearly at the end of the journey and are moving into the implementation phase of development. Finally, Miller Homes and Chamberlain Bell are both experienced developers. They will deliver the new build housing and the conversion of the listed buildings respectively. Hillcrest Housing Association, RSL, will provide the 28 on-site affordable houses and are finalising the delivery package with your officers. So this is a technical application for matters specified by condition. The principle of development in terms of the scale and unit numbers, general arrangements such as access over the site have been established. The application is consistent with your development plan policy, which supports redevelopment of the site and saving the listed buildings. We've provided significant information as part of this detailed process, and that has been assessed forensically by your officers. The proposals have always been technically competent and have raised no objections from statutory consultees, including SEPA, Scottish Water, Historic Environment Scotland, or Scottish Natural Heritage. And we've responded positively, I think, to a number of the detailed issues raised by officers and by local residents. And I think that's recognised by Karen in what she said as well. Ecology surveys on bats and badgers have been updated. The conversion of the listed buildings have been separately consented. Footpath links in respect to the safe route to school and routes through the site have been provided, and we have edited and amended the layout and house types to provide passive security overlooking of those footpaths, public open spaces. The public open space provision is in excess of policy requirements across this 42-acre site, and we've made detailed layout changes and design changes to distinct character zones across the site, including introducing different house types and heights. The Rose Garden is being reintroduced, and there will be a construction management plan which will ensure separate construction access is taken to avoid conflict with the residents of Ashton Terrace, and Miller and the contractors will engage in a good contractor protocol, which will establish confirming points of contact for regular communication between the contractors and the local residents. New bus stops are being provided on both sides of Craigmill Road, and significantly more new trees of different species, standards and growth rates will be provided over those lost. Ed said there's about 120 trees coming away. 120 additional trees which are coming away, which are due to their age, condition and decay. We are proposing to plant 915 new trees of different standards and growth rates. And in addition to that, in the woodland areas, there's underplanting of whips for sustainable management of the new woodland of over 7,500 new whips in the woodland areas. We have the master plan team here from EMA, representatives from both Miller and Chamberlain Bell to answer any specific queries, but I very much hope that you can approve the application this morning and we can get to the end of the Strathmartin journey. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Evans. Any questions to Mr. Evans or his team that's sitting with him this morning? Councillor Grace, followed by Councillor Moore.
Yes, thanks, convener, and thanks, Mr. Evans, for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. We do have 21 objections to this proposal. And I wondered, you know, we've heard that you've been consulting with residents, and that's great. That's exactly the way we should be proceeding and continue. But I just wondered, and this is tricky for you to answer, I realise that, but I wondered if you could give us an indication of how many of those objectors have been satisfied by the changes and how many of the objectors maybe just can't be satisfied with what you're proposing?
It's that old adage that you can't keep all the people happy all of the time, I think. What I can say, and perhaps Karen Macaulay can perhaps respond and come in on this as well. What we've tried to do, Councillor, is respond positively to those specific issues raised. For example, there was a concern about the construction access being taken along Ashton Terrace. So what we've agreed with the developers is to provide a separate new means of access which avoids using Ashton Terrace for construction traffic, for example. So those objectors that have said we don't want construction traffic coming past our front door down Ashton Terrace, we've satisfied that. Now, some of those objectors were also saying that there was insufficient parking provided for the affordable housing units. That parking has been increased. And over and above that, I think there's an additional 12 spaces being provided for visitor parking at the end with a turning circle at Ashton Terrace. You can drive down Ashton Terrace, turn and come back out again very conveniently. So we've taken account of that. There was issues about the footpaths, the routing of the footpaths, whether the footpaths would be safe and used, whether they were through woodland areas or at the back of gardens. We've relocated some of the footpaths, rerouted some of the footpaths, reorientated some of the houses so that the footpaths are being overlooked by the fronts of houses now, so there's passive security, for example. The open space provision has been debated and discussed in detail with the landscape and play officers, and we're providing more than the space standards that are required. I think in terms of just the narrative, the storytelling, and engaging with the local community, we had been through that process, although it seems like some time ago. Largely because it was some time ago at the time of the planning permission in principle. So there was a statutory full public consultation exercise at that time. This is a more detailed layer of an AMC application. Doesn't formally require us to do any of that pre-application consultation, but I think, as I've said, that there should be a good contractor protocol, and we're more than happy to have that dialogue with local residents. So we've responded positively to some of these things. It might satisfy some people, but perhaps not all.
Okay, thanks. And another question too on the woodland, and you said that trees have to come out. I think this is maybe the sort of peripheral woodland, but you did say that that you would be planting whips.
Yes.
Now, I just wondered, and this is for ongoing maintenance of the woodland, is it a case that you're going to plant the whips and that's it done, or will there be ongoing maintenance in that woodland forever? And
yeah, absolutely.
If so, is that maintenance then part of the factoring agreement that you will have with purchasers?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Right. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, good morning, Mr. Evans. You've made comment that the public open space provision is in excess of the council policy. Would it not have been possible to have reduced the open space slightly and retained some of the trees?
Well, I don't think the two are mutually incompatible. Open space doesn't necessarily mean that the spaces are open by removing all the trees, but the open spaces will and play equipment, areas for passive and active, formal and informal areas of open space. I don't think they're mutually incompatible.
Right, and the play area seems to be towards the top of the site, which makes it very convenient for the mainstream housing. But has any thought been given to the young children from the affordable housing having to, go up to the top of the site for it? Could it not have been located more conveniently for all?
Possibly. It's not. These aren't huge differences and distances, and I think that as I say, there are areas of both active and passive open space. I mean, the whole site is a very high quality landscape environment and landscape setting. There will be any number of footpath and cycle routes through and around the site. there are no barriers, if you like, to using or utilising these areas, and I don't think that the distances involved are that significant from top to bottom or from one side of the site to the other.
Thank you. And one other thing, as a member of the member officer working group looking at winter maintenance, given that this site has got such a significant contour on it, are you considering putting in salt bins so that residents can provide their own support rather than having to require a council gritter to come out?
I will defer probably to one of my associates in the design team. The short answer would be, yeah, that's probably a sensible idea, particularly because of the contours across the site. And we would work closely with the roads, your roads officers, in terms of the placement of those as well. And Andy, if you're on and available, that would be something directed best to you, I think.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Yes, I think first and foremost is that Miller Homes for winter maintenance up until such time that the roads are adopted by Angus Council. We would put grit bins in to whatever specification Angus Council desired at the adoption stage, but I'm happy to commit to putting in grit bins in the interim period up until adoption.
Thank you.
Councillor Brace, another one question?
Yes, thanks, convener. And I maybe should ask this earlier. Ms. Macaulay mentioned the fact that former residents of Strathmartin Hospital still live in close proximity, and she was concerned about some issues that they might experience during the demolition and construction phase. Would you be able to give some assurances that you will try to, or at least give consideration to their emotional well-being? Have you any steps in mind you might be taking?
Well, again, I can ask Andy perhaps to come in on this, but it's something that we find increasingly with the redevelopment of these sorts of sites. This isn't the kind of only former hospital site that certainly I'm involved with, and no doubt Millers and the rest of the development team have done likewise, but it is an important part of, I think, that the good husbandry, the good contractor relationship, actually making sure that people know and understand what's going on, so that they understand the story and the backstory, that this is a new part of the journey for Strathmartin itself. And that can be done in a number of different ways, whether or not that's done through a formal or informal sort of community liaison group, whether it's done by newsletters or leaflet drops, or by active management, so that you can invite people out in small groups to visit the site and actually kind of see what's happening. Other things that is quite important sometimes is the interpretation of the story. Many people within the local community will have worked on site or lived on site or had jobs with maintenance or servicing or catering or the landscape. There'll be strong and very real linked emotions connected with the site. So all of these things can be done, probably best done through the contractor, through construction management.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any more questions? No other questions. Just like to thank you, Mr. Evans, for your presentation. Now look to move on to comments. Members wish to make any comments before we move on to make a decision in this planning application?
Councillor Duff, convener.
Councillor Duff, you're way in the corner there.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Yeah, like many, I'm very pleased to see this application come forward today. I remember the meeting in December 2014. This application was recommended for refusal by officers at the time. As I recall, I raised the amendment to, and it's been a long winding process, but we finally got here. We often hear about win-win situations. I think here we've got a quadruple win. There is a win for the NHS, which has obviously received a significant bounty for selling the site, and the NHS is always short of money, as we know. I think that some of the comments that are made, I'm not particularly. When the NHS leave a site, they just lock the door, apply a security guard, and leave the council and the emergency services to deal with all the problems. And I don't think that's particularly acceptable for me. If it was a steel plant or a chemical plant, they wouldn't be allowed to do that. I think that's a thing we need to think about, a bit of joined up thinking. I think there's a plus for the council, both education and social housing, and a significant money going into primary and secondary education. So there's two wins there. And finally, I think there is a win for both the fire service and the police, because Strathmartin Hospital has been a huge burden on both of those, with fire raising, vandalism for many, many years. So I think there's a lot of benefits to society as a whole. It's always been one that's been close to my thoughts, because I have a hospital, an abandoned NHS hospital in my ward, in fact very close to where I live, which is Sunnyside, and Sunnyside is now thankfully slowly being redeveloped, and my fear always was that Sunnyside might suffer some of the same problems that Strathmartin has. Thankfully it hasn't. There's been some low-level vandalism, but nothing more. So yeah, I'm very pleased to see this develop, and I'm wish Mr. Evans and his colleagues all the success to get the job done.
Right, thank you, Councillor Duff. Councillor Brace.
Yes, well, I would echo Councillor Duff's concerns about the fact that the NHS just kind of lock the gates and walk away and leave everyone else to pick up the pieces. And hopefully something can change in that department in the future. He also mentioned that it's a quadruple win. Perhaps it's even more than that. You know, the fact is that we're using a brownfield site to create all these new family homes for people. And I fully recognise that it would be far, far quicker, cheaper and easier for a developer to do this on prime agricultural land. You know, that's why we have this brownfield sites. You know, we need to try and preserve what prime agricultural land we have. So, you know, this is the ideal place, and it's just a shame it's taken 20 years or so to get here. But I do recognise, though, that when we speak about a win-win situation or a quadruple win, it will not feel like that for some of the objectors to this. It's going to mean, you know, a change to their quality of life, and not necessarily for the better. But as always, we have to look at the bigger picture. And I do feel sorry for these people, but very supportive of this, though.
Right, thank you, Councillor Brace. Councillor Moore.
Councillor Durnow's before me, convener.
Well, I'll carry on, Councillor Moore.
Okay, thank you, convener. Yes, a brownfield site being redeveloped is a wonderful thing. Saves a lot of greenfield sites. We ought to be having a target for how much brownfield site we develop. But this one, yes, it's a wonderful idea. It's a shame we lose trees, but if we can get so many more back, then it's a win there as well. My only one concern about it is the affordable housing, because just because you're in affordable housing doesn't mean to say that you're outside society. Sticking them in a corner, out the way, okay, it's more convenient. Why 28 properties in the mainstream area couldn't be affordable is another matter, but all told, this is a win. This is something that we should be approving.
Right, thank you, Councillor Moore. My apologies, Councillor Dunner, you've disappeared from my sight.
Thanks, convener. It was just something that Karen McCauley said there. I used to visit the site in a former job. I was a sales rep and I used to go to the site, did the toilet roll, etc. at the time. And it was just something that she said about the residents there and being their home. And it was very much was a home. And also all the staff that worked there, had some friends that worked there as well, and it was a great community place at the time. And I just wondered that hopefully on this site maybe there's some kind of community memorial could be there for patients and staff that are no longer there to represent what was at that time. And the new development, I think that would be nice if the community could put something like that up at some point during the development. That would be lovely.
Right, thank you, Councillor Dunno. Any other comments? Well, if there's no other comments, this has been a long and bumpy road. I've been on development standards for 23 years, so I've been in on the onset of this planning application, done a couple of site visits, and as I'm not standing for re-election, it gives me great pleasure to have always hoped this would come up before me or before the committee before I retired. So this gives me great pleasure, and I'm moving this application for approval with the conditions that are attached. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. So therefore, planning application 21/0095 is approved with the conditions attached. Okay, thank you, Mr. Evans and your team. Get on well with this development, and I'll keep my eye on it, although I'll be in the background. Give me great pleasure to see this coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Agenda item number 7. This is a pre-application notice for land at Clover Estate. Do you have slides on this?
I do have a couple of slides, convener. Happy to share them. Is that on the screen for everybody? Full screen.
Yep.
Yes, it's on mine anyway, Ed.
Great. Okay, so item 7 relates to a proposal for application notice, which is associated with a future major planning application for the formation of forestry tracts associated with woodland operations on land at Clover Estate. So the position of the site is illustrated 3 polygons with the red dotted line. So it would be on both sides of the road through Clover, extending into the lower slopes of the hill towards Loch Brandy on the north side and on the other side of the valley also. So members may note the position of the line on the slide. That is the boundary of the Cairngorms National Park. So everything on the left hand side of that, including the would-be application site, is located within the Cairngorms National Park. So what that means is any subsequent future planning application would be assessed against policies of the Cairngorms National Park Local Development Plan. The information we've received to date suggests development, so it's likely to be supported by an environmental impact assessment report, and that relates to its position of the likelihood of environmental, which is sensitive in terms of it being in the national park, in terms of it being close to areas designated for golden eagles, and to the River South Esk in terms of impacts on the species Atlantic salmon and freshwater pearl mussel body. The other relevant factor at this stage is a future planning application is reasonably likely to be called in by early discussions with them have suggested it's something that is likely to be called in. So an application for planning permission for this development when the time comes is probably not something that will become before members, but there is a chance that it would, so it's appropriate that we follow the usual procedure for reporting this likely planning. So the position of the would-be hill tracks is located by the red squiggles either side of the road shown here, just in the lower slopes of the hills. And officers have set out in the report before members what they consider to be the key considerations for a future planning application for this development, but as invited to identify any additional considerations they would like officers to raise with the prospective applicant.
Right, thank you, Ed. Questions or you'd like answered? Noted. As Ed has said, this will be probably called in by the Cairngorms Park anyway for decision. So for any members of the committee to point out any concerns that they have at this point in time. No, well, therefore, this will conclude our meeting, the last one before the elections. I would just like to take this opportunity for all those that are standing again. Wish you all the best. All the best for Angus Council. This will be my last meeting, I think, after 23 years being on Angus Council. So I'll just close the meeting without commenting any further. So just like to wish you all the best in the future.
Reciprocated.
Thanks, Convener.
Thank you.
Thank you.